So tonight what I'm going to do is kind of give you all, let's say, an overview of how emotions play out in your day-to-day process, also how stress and trauma play out. And since we're always talking about weight loss here, I want you to understand how weight loss is a component of that and how it is directly affected by the level of stress that you have in your life, because I know you've already done a class about cortisol, but I also want to help you give your perspective on exactly how trauma plays out in looking at that. So I'm going to start off with this very basic model called the stress model, and then we'll look at some brain stuff, and then we're going to do an exercise. Is that stereo still here? I'm going to need that. Ashley, you have to take it back home.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So this is a model I've been teaching pretty much for the last 14 years. Very simple. It says all behavior arises from a state of stress. And in between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only two primary emotions. Does anyone know what they are?
Anger. No, anger's not a...
There are only
Happy
two.
and sad?
Huh?
Happy and sad?
Well, close.
Oh, I know what. I can't think of fear.
Love and fear.
There we go. I knew fear was one.
Love and fear are only two primary emotions. So all behavior arises from a state of stress. In between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only two primary emotions, love and fear. It's through the understanding, the expressing, and the processing of the emotion that we can calm the stress and diminish the behavior. I went over that kind of quick, but we're going to get back to it. So here's the way it works. Any behavior you can talk about, and let's just talk about eating junk food. Not working out, not sleeping, all the way to arguments, feeling depressed, and all the behaviors that surfaces. Any behavior you can think of, we can put at the top of this chain. And here's the significance. Every single one of these behaviors is rooted in stress. And stress is any internal, external event that causes your body to be knocked out of balance, causes your body to be knocked out of homeostasis. And what happens when that occurs, when your body senses any threat, you have a handout there. There are a number of sensory pathways, 7 to be correct. Seeing, hearing, smell, touch, taste, movement, and internal process. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All of these are sensory pathways. What you see can cause a stress reaction. What you smell causes a stress reaction. What you hear, what you touch, what you taste, just moving causes a stress reaction. And then the internal processes that go on in your body cause you stress reactions. All of those things, and these are oftentimes unconscious. You're not even thinking about these things. You go through you've gone all day long, and you've paid very little attention to any of these pathways. All of these are at the body level. And because they're at the body level, we're just not aware of them. So what happens is these events trigger our stress response in our brain. So at the base of our brain, we have a little structure called the amygdala. We'll just start another little... We'll use a little different structure here. So this is your, let's say this is your spinal cord. This is your brain stem. And then right above your brain stem, you know what? I think I'll use the same kind we did earlier today. It's like a lollipop. I like the lollipop analogy. This is you. Okay? So you have your spinal cord. This is where your autonomic nervous system. And here, you have your brain stem. Your brain stem is the first part of your brain to develop. It starts to develop in utero. Okay? Right above your brain stem is your amygdala. All of your earliest experiences, every memory you ever have, every experience you ever have, are stored at the level of the brainstem and the amygdala. So everything you've ever gone through, all the way back from conception. As early as the 4th week after conception, the fetus can hear. I want you to think about this. As early as the 4th week, you're 4 weeks old, in the womb, you can already hear. As early as the 2nd trimester, the fetus has the ability for psychological processing. So in the womb, at the 2nd trimester, you're already thinking, and your thinking is occurring through your mother. So however your mother experiences the world, that's what you're experiencing, that's what you're internalizing, and those are experiences that you will carry with you for the rest of your life. So here's an important question for you to consider. What was your in utero experience like? That's one. Another one is, what was your birth like? So you think now, okay, I'm 35, 40 years old. Where was mom? So you don't know what it was like, but I want you to ask yourself, where was mom when she was pregnant with you? What was going on in her life? Where did she live? What were the circumstances? Was there stress? Was there enough money? Was there a dad? Was dad there? Was dad supportive? Was dad in the military? Was he gone a lot? Were there other kids she was trying to raise? Think about this, because all of those things have an impact on you now. All of those experiences have an impact on you now. John Bowlby is known as the father of attachment. Attachment is the process of the child connecting to the parent early in development. He says the first 3 years of life establishes the blueprint for all of your future relationships. So what you experience from conception to 3 years of life, because it's so cemented in the brain, it dictates so many of your future relationships. So if you think for yourself, what was going on in utero? Think about those kind of experiences. Think about what stressors were there. All of those experiences are buried right here. Trauma is any stressful event which is prolonged, overwhelming, or unpredictable. Any stressful event. Any one event that you've lived in your life and experienced in your life that you consider to be overwhelming, that may have been prolonged, or it may have been unpredictable, has the ability to impact you for the rest of your life. The rest of your life. And we had a patient in here this morning who shared, when we started talking about that, she shared a trauma for her that she had really not ever realized. It was the doctors told her that her husband was diagnosed with cancer and he only had 3 to 6 months to live. And she immediately touched her chest right here because she said, I felt like I couldn't breathe. And she kept touching it. And that's what she does now to this day. She continues to go back to that same place, and she'd never really processed that. Single events, they don't have to be that, it could be a car wreck that you had 20 years ago, can still show up in your life every single day. It could be an absent parent, it could be an alcoholic parent, it could be any number of things. Any stressful event that is prolonged, overwhelming, and unpredictable shows up in your life right now. So you ask yourself, what events have shown up? And we're going to do a little exercise where I want you to think about, when was it that you started to gain weight and you seemingly couldn't cut it off? When was the beginning? When did it start? Because we all gain and then we lose and then we gain and then we lose. Well, what was going on in your life when you started to gain the most? Something significant was happening. And because it most likely didn't get expressed or processed or understood, guess where it's at? It's still lingering around right here. And your amygdala, which is your fear receptor in your brain, it's also your alarm system. It's like a light switch. Every time your amygdala gets triggered, it releases stress. So every time you get stressed out now, your amygdala drops down into your brainstem and starts stirring all those painful experiences. And when all those painful experiences get stirred up, they shoot right up to your thinking. And the problem with that is that stress causes confused and distorted thinking. So, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but here we have a couple of glands, and we're going to consider this the gut. And these are your adrenal glands. Your dominant stress hormone in your gut is adrenaline. Your dominant stress hormone in your brain is cortisol. And it originates with the amygdala. So the amygdala is not a part of your thinking brain. It is all reactive, it's all emotional, it's caveman. I mean, it is wired for survival. And it just guides us through every day. So once your amygdala, you might have heard fight or flight. You ever heard fight or flight response?
Yeah.
Well, 15 years ago, they added freeze. So it's fight, flight, or freeze. And the significance of that is that your freeze reaction is actually your initial reaction. So we don't fight or flee initially. Initially, we freeze. Now see, that's significant because a lot of people, when they've experienced really stressful events in their lives or traumatic events, what their bodies will do is go into shock. That's a form of trauma, shock trauma. So if you've ever found yourself in a stressful situation and you couldn't move, you couldn't talk, you were just speechless, you felt hostage, you were in shock. And a lot of people don't understand shock because it's so subtle. Because you think about, there are kids every day in school systems right now, and they sit quietly and they really don't do any work, but because they sit quietly and they really don't cause a problem, the teacher thinks that they're just a pretty good kid. Well, most of these kids are in shock all day long. Their systems are completely overwhelmed. Okay, so take a deep breath. Breathe. Just relax, calm your body. All of this can get really activating as you're hearing it, as you're listening to it, as you're internalizing it. So sometimes you just have to slow your body down. That's all it is. It's like slowing down your amygdala. And see, that's what helps us create the space between being stressed out, wanting some junk food, wanting to veg out, wanting to do nothing, versus doing something positive. It's just the ability to slow down, take a deep breath, calm your thinking, and make a different choice. I mean, it really is that simple. It's just not easy. It's really difficult in the midst of it. So your amygdala is responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. When your amygdala, after you're born, your amygdala completes its development in the first 18 months of life. The first 18 months, by the time you're 18 months old, you have a fully developed fear receptor in your brain. So by the time you're 18 months old, you are already capable of experiencing as much stress as you can possibly handle. And you really can't do anything with it. It's just the way your brain develops. We're wired for to move towards survival. Above your amygdala are two other structures. One here is called the pituitary. And alongside the pituitary is another one called the hypothalamus. The amygdala takes stress hormones and send them up to the pituitary, and once they pass through the pituitary, they combine with another hormone, and then they form cortisol. So your amygdala sends a signal up to the pituitary, and here's where another little dynamic is supposed to take place. So we look at this, I kind of look at this as like a feedback loop. So when your amygdala sends the stress signals up to the pituitary passes it on, and if it's unabated, if it's uninterrupted, then the stress just builds higher and higher and higher, and it affects the upper level thinking parts of your brain. But the hypothalamus, because it sits next to the pituitary, is supposed to release a counter hormone. And that counter hormone is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the brain's anti-stress hormone. Those of you who had children, you've probably heard of it in labor and delivery. We've known about it since 1905. The Greek meaning of oxytocin is quick birth, because we've given it to women for years and years and years to help induce labor. But in the last 20 years, we've started to realize that, wait a minute, this hormone actually has another, just probably more important purpose. And it is to calm your stress response. Oxytocin.
That was perfect timing. Having that fight or flight.
And then,
take a breath.
Laughter is a way to release oxytocin. It's a very simple way. It's a basic way that we release oxytocin. So we just calm down again. Because if we hadn't just calmed down, we'd still be really activated. So we laugh. We realize we're safe. So we're calming our amygdala, because our amygdala says, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe. So we laugh. We say, oh, we're safe, we're safe. We release oxytocin. We calm back down. Our thinking gets back online. Our short-term memory turns back on. And then we're able to engage, and we're able to continue and stay focused. Oxytocin is the brain's anti-stress hormone. So what's important about that is oxytocin is a learned hormone. So this response of your amygdala is automatic. Your amygdala is going to develop regardless. But your oxytocin response is learned. How do you learn oxytocin as an infant? You have to have a caregiver to take care of you. You have to have attuned, consistent, predictable caregiving. You have to have a mama who keeps you safe and changes your diaper and feeds you and loves on you, and a daddy who loves the mama to keep her feeling good, and a daddy who loves on you. And you have all these good feelings circulating in the environment, and that good feeling is oxytocin. And what that does is it strengthens your brain against stress. But it is learned. If you grow up in environments, like I spent years and years and years working with kids who grew up in orphanages, who were adopted from Russia, China, Romania, and they were one of 30 and 50 kids. And they had no one to pick them up, no one to change them, no one to hold them, no one to feed them. And so their brains literally shrink under the stress that goes on in their lives. And there are brain scans that show the difference between a healthy, developed brain at a certain age. I think I've got a slide of a 3-year-old brain, which is like the size of a grapefruit, compared to the brain of a child who comes from neglect. It's like the size of an orange. It's that much difference. But you can't tell the difference because both the kids physically they look the same, but their brains are actually different. So oxytocin becomes very important, and oxytocin, it gets released naturally, like I said, through laughter. It gets released through eye contact. It gets, one of the biggest ways oxytocin gets released in our brains now is with a hug. You can give a 20-second hug, and one of the ways we've always known that oxytocin gets released is with orgasm. So it's always associated with orgasm because that's the good feeling. But a 20-second hug actually releases more oxytocin in your brain than even an orgasm does. But a 20-second hug is a long hug. It's a long hug, but it's that powerful. And so it's never too late for you to learn to turn on oxytocin, but when you didn't get it early, your thermostat for responding to stress gets set at a very low level. So if you didn't have someone to do all those good things for you early, your thermostat gets set at like a 60, but your stress jumps up to like 100, and then you're trying to get your thermostat up to cool down the environment, and your thermostat won't move. So you stay agitated longer. You stay more stressed longer. And when that happens, you start to do all the things, according to the stress model, I'll go back to that in a minute, that are actually counterproductive to your system. And I'll show you how this all gets tied into.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So you said a 20-second hug, that's like a long time. What if you feel really awkward? Is that doing anything for you?
It still is.
Okay.
And sometimes you have to grow into it. You start with what's comfortable. In 5 seconds, you build up to 10 seconds. So you feel really awkward because your body is, you go back to the sensory pathways, touch. Anytime someone is touching you, research says it's just like they are literally touching your brain. It is that activating. So it's like when you're touching someone's skin, the skin has the same amount of receptors as the brain does. So you can be literally touching someone's brain when you're being touched. So it can be very stressful. And our systems aren't always used to that. You think about the last time you were really stressed and your significant other or even your child wanted to give you a hug, or when you were like, get off.
Yeah.
Stop. Right? Because what you're doing is you're trying to cut down. And if you'll notice your eye contact, rarely do you go, get off of me. You go, get off. Stop. So you're taking out sensory pathways. You don't want to look. You don't want to touch. You don't even want them talking to you. Ah, la, 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 la. Right?
Right, yes.
Because you're trying to calm yourself down. And it's natural. It's automatic. It's like your stress is so high, you can't do anything else. You can't take on any more stimulation than you're already taking on, and you're just doing the best you can to try to regulate. Unfortunately, we become conditioned. There's negative conditioning and there's positive conditioning. When we start to experience that kind of stress, which drives our behaviors, and that's going to be fear. What you have to understand about fear, the reason love and fear are primary emotions is that we have trillions of cells in our body. Trillions. Every single one of our cells has conscious ability. Every single one of our cells communicates to every other cell in our body. So it's like every cell in your body is a little computer system. And the moment that computer gets turned on, it starts communicating to all the other computers in your body system, and that's what formulates thought. So when you are stressed, your cells constrict into survival. Your body only knows two states, surviving and thriving. You're either a closed system or you're an open system. When you are stressed and your body moves into survival, that is the state akin to fear. That's all you know at that point. Everything originates from one of those two levels. Anger at its root is fear. We just have a hard time seeing an angry person as being scared. And the reason we have a hard time seeing an angry person as scared is because our brain is wired to see a threat. Mm-hmm. So when your brain is wired to see a threat and you see an angry person, that's all you see is a threat. You can't see that underneath that person they're really scared. But once you condition yourself to look underneath the anger, to see the fear, it becomes very clear. Then your whole body changes. The next time you encounter an angry person, or the next time you yourself become angry, just try to stop for one moment and ask yourself, what am I really afraid of in this moment? And that in and of itself will take an edge off. But if you see someone who's angry, instead of trying to see the anger, just ask yourself, are they really scared right now? Where's the fear at? Can I see them as scared? That'll change your whole body response, your whole physiology. So when we become stressed from any number of these triggering events, it leads to the emotion. The emotion is fear. That fear, what the body then does, and this is how we get back to the positive and negative conditioning, what the body then does is it does its best to try to soothe the fear and the stress. But it does that by coming out in negative behaviors. It becomes maladaptive. Because, if you go back here, there's another level above the pituitary and hypothalamus, and it's called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for your clear thinking. It's also responsible, could you turn the air conditioner down a little, for short-term memory. So when you've had this stress reaction at the level of your brain, it comes up to the pituitary. In an ideal situation, your hypothalamus gets triggered, realizing that stress is being released, and it starts to release oxytocin, which then calms down your stress. It comes up to your hippocampus. Your hippocampus takes that information and says, oh, this is okay. we can make it through this event. This is going to be all right. So then your thinking stays on track. And then you have one more level, and that's called your prefrontal cortex. This is where our talking and thinking right now occurs. This is where your day-to-day functioning occurs, at your prefrontal cortex. But what we don't realize is that your prefrontal cortex is actually held hostage by your brainstem and your amygdala. So as long as your amygdala is releasing stress hormones and oxytocin's getting released and you're calm, you're staying relatively calm, everything's okay. The problem is when the amygdala gets triggers the stress, the oxytocin, for whatever sundry reasons, is not getting turned on. You're not getting any help in soothing your stress. In fact, what you're experiencing is more stress. You may be experiencing, more neglect or more, there's just, you just had, the house was clean this morning when you left, and now you come home and it's dirty again, and you've worked all day, and now there are demands, you're hungry, and then there's piles of clothes, and you're stressed out from work, and you got kids crying, you got friends calling, and you're like, Calgon, take me away. Okay? Calgon, take me away really is trying to give someone oxytocin. But if you can't get it, because how many of us will actually stop in the middle of craziness and go take a bubble bath? We won't. But it's one of the best things we could do. Really? Think about it. If you're in the midst of your craziness, what if you just went and took a hot bubble bath? How much more relaxed would you be when you came back to the madness? And you know what you'd usually experience? The madness has actually died down. But because of our amygdala and because of what it does to the hippocampus, it gets all of the thinking. It's like with Popeye and Olive Oil or the Gargoyles when he'd be on the phone and all you hear is sometimes with Charlie Brown. Well, that's what happens to your thinking when the stress is unabated and it hits the hippocampus. Everything gets confused and become overwhelmed. And you say in that moment, there's no way I could stop and go take a hot bubble bath. There's no way I can go exercise. There's no way I can eat right. There's no way I can excuse. Why? Because all your short-term memory shut down. You can't even think about it. All your thinking is confused and distorted. Stress causes confused and distorted thinking and suppresses the short-term memory. Very simple. Very basic. Stress causes confused and distorted thinking and shuts down the short-term memory. As long as you are stressed, you cannot think clearly. And as long as you're stressed, those messages then come up to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the executive control center for all of your social and emotional relationships. So then which relationships suffer the most? The ones the closest to you. Because you just can't function. You can't function effectively. Now, when you can't function effectively, come back to the stress model, we come back to our conditioned maladaptive patterns, we become stressed, we become scared, and then we choose negative behaviors. And those negative behaviors, guess what they do? They create more stress. So you have the negative behaviors that then create more stress, which generate more fear, which then lead to more negative behaviors. And it just continues on and on and on and on again. And the goal is to be able to experience the stress, come up here and recognize the emotion, calm the emotion. You have to be able to start understanding the emotion, becoming aware of the emotion. Because the first step, which is just awareness, actually starts to reduce the stress. Just awareness starts to release oxytocin. And as you start to release oxytocin, then your stress and your fear start to diminish. And when your stress and your fear start to diminish, and your oxytocin starts to pick up, because oxytocin is also called the love hormone, love starts to increase. And when love starts to increase, guess what you start to do up here? You start to choose different behaviors. But you have to do that long enough for it to become conditioned. Because otherwise, you become stressed out and you're right back to ground zero. You have to start all over again.
So how do you know if you have processed trauma? You know what I mean? How do you know if you really...
As long as an event goes unexpressed, unprocessed, and misunderstood, it becomes long-term trauma. So when you haven't had an opportunity to talk about it, when you haven't, in the talking, been able to really express, and then from that process you really haven't been able to understand why it happened, what the, what its role was in your life, you haven't been able to make it a part of your life, then it's not been processed. Most people don't process trauma. The reason is because it's scary and it hurts. Who wants to feel bad? So you felt bad once, you sure don't want to revisit it and feel bad again, so we do our best to just suppress it. Well, when we suppress it, what we're actually doing is just storing it right here. See, it never goes away. We never lose a single memory. Your memories just become integrated, so you don't need them any longer. So they don't keep showing up in your life. But when your memories aren't integrated, meaning you don't have an acceptance of them, you don't see how they continue to play out in your life, then they continue to just show up. Every time you become stressed, they show up at some level. So most people we just don't, trauma is just too difficult, and then you have to be in relationship to process the trauma, and if you're looking to one another for that, that's going to be difficult because people get overwhelmed by emotions. What's the first thing we usually do when someone starts to cry? We want to give them a Kleenex, or we want to try to soothe them and tell them it's okay. Well, that's actually not the best thing to do, because that's just pushing their emotions down. When someone starts to cry, the best thing to do is to tell me about it. Tell me how you feel. I can handle it. Let me know. And then they can continue to process. But when we get uncomfortable, and we do that with our kids, we were conditioned to do it. When we were infants, our parents would pick us up and go, shh, 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 shh. Other questions?
It's really interesting. It's a lot to process.
It is. I'm like, you are recording this, right?
It is.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting what the lady said this morning about you don't want to focus on the negative and how long till you've worked through it, but I think that's really interesting what you said about that acceptance and the significance in your life and how you've grown. It's like kind of like forgiveness. Forgiveness is on that same level, of recognizing that and not focusing on the negative, but when it doesn't continue to visit you every time you get stressed in some other form or even in that form. Because what you're upset about is usually in the moment, is not usually what's really at the core of what your fears are, or what you're really upset about. If you start peeling that onion,
Sure.
There's always something else there.
Yeah, what we are typically reactive to and emotional about has nothing to do with what we're really reactive to and emotional about. And I say all reactivity stems from unfinished business. Rarely is it the person or the thing that you're upset about.
So what do you do when you have a spouse who is a debater, or who, if he's frustrated, or if he knows you're frustrated with him, he pushes you to talk about it, but it's intense.
Yeah.
For me to talk when I'm angry is not a good time for me to talk. I'm one of those that think, okay, I need to walk away right now because I'm gonna say something I don't want to say. My mom said, if you don't, taught me, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. But he just pushes and is like, I want to know, because he feels like I'm hiding something from him if I don't say what's on my mind.
He feels helpless. If you don't say what's on your mind, he feels helpless to not be able to do anything about it. So then he feels scared. And so then he has learned, because he's not comfortable with his emotions, he's learned to talk, to get you to talk, is what's going to get it figured out.
That just makes me more angry.
So what you have to say to him, if you can, you look at him and you say, we're okay. You're safe. I just need some time. So you have to tell him those specific words. We're okay. Because he could have rejection and abandonment fears too. And so when you start shutting down, he feels rejected or it's threatening his abandonment, and then he comes at you even harder because he wants to try to avoid that. So you just say, look, we're safe. I'm just really upset and I need some time to calm down.
My husband and I used to go through that. I'm the same as you. I'd be like, I gotta go, you know. And we came to a point where we discussed what I was feeling in that moment in a time when the emotion or the intensity wasn't there. We were able to say, I was able to tell him, look, when I feel this way, I really have to have some space. And it's not you, it's I gotta process this and I need you to leave me alone for a while. And once I was able to explain what I was feeling, like during that time, we've been okay with
Set the
that
ground
process.
Set the ground rules during
I've
the
tried
Yeah.
that with him, with my husband, but I don't know, for some reason, maybe it is a fear thing.
Ask him what he's afraid of.
Yeah,
Maybe it is a fear thing, because I just,
And do it while you guys are calm.
yeah.
but it stresses me out, and I'm like, okay, how do I not get stressed out, because he makes me mad.
Well, you can't, but you have to do it when you're calm. And that's the thing about breathing. See, breathing is the single most effective way to turn on your oxytocin. But what's the first thing we do when we're stressed?
Hold on.
Stop breathing. And then you increase your stress response even more. Reduce your oxytocin. So I always teach people, practice your breathing while you're calm, not when you're stressed. So when you're standing in the grocery line and you're not really stressed, breathe. Inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth. When you're driving along, you're feeling good. Practice your breathing. Become mindful of your breathing. Become mindful of your thinking. Become mindful of your feelings, because then you start to create more conditioning and awareness about those things. And so while the two of you are calm, say, honey, I'm just curious. When I get really upset or when we're having an argument, what is it about that really bothers you? Use bother, don't use scared yet, but I want you to keep scared in the back of your mind. Scared that word can be too threatening for some people, because most of them have never thought of themselves as being scared. But say, what is it that really bothers you? And then once he answers that, and just say, what's so scary about that? What are you afraid's going to happen? Let's see what he comes up with.
Okay.
You might be surprised. But you guys can have those conversations while you're calm. And you don't have to wait until you're all stressed out.